Ever get that feeling? Like you really want to get a grip on some seriously tricky idea, but you just don't have the time to wade through a whole library of text.
I know exactly what you mean.
Well, that's what we're all about today, folks. Taking a deep dive, a real deep dive, into this concept that seems to pop up everywhere in philosophy. Category mistakes.
Absolutely. And to do that, we're going right to the source. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on, you guessed it, category mistakes.
It's like we're getting the philosopher's cliff notes, the expert's cut.
Precisely.
So our mission today is to understand, for all of you listening, what these category mistakes are, why they've got philosophers so riled up, and what they tell us about the way we use language, the way we think about the world around us.
And right out of the gate, this Stanford Encyclopedia gives us some seriously strange examples. The number 2 is blue, the theory of relativity is eating breakfast, and maybe my favorite, green ideas sleep furiously.
Yeah, those just hit different, don't they?
They do. There's
Yeah.
something just off about them.
It's not just that they're wrong, right? It's not like saying Paris is the capital of Germany or messing up your grammar like me want cookie. It's a whole other level of wrongness here.
You hit the nail on the head. That unique brand of wrongness, that's the heart of the puzzle we're trying to crack today. What makes these sentences so uniquely infelicitous is the word they use. Philosophers have been going back and forth on this for ages, and we're going to break down some of their biggest explanations.
Okay, so first things first. What even is a category mistake? Seems like it should be a pretty straightforward thing to define right. But our good friends at Stanford hint that it's actually a lot trickier than you might think.
It really is. Like the first definition you might reach for, the dictionary one, assigning to something a quality or action which can only properly be assigned to things of another category, well, it kind of runs into a wall right away.
How so?
Well, if by properly assigned we mean like truly assigned, then something like 2 is odd would fit the bill, right? But that doesn't have that same weird ring to it as the examples we just talked about.
Right, like 2 is odd, but not in the same way you'd say a sock is odd or, birthday party is odd.
Exactly. But then if you switch gears and say properly assigned means like grammatically assigned, then you'd end up calling all sorts of messed up sentences category mistakes, even if they just plain don't make sense grammatically.
Like cats barks.
Yeah, something like that. Doesn't really feel like we're talking about the same kind of thing.
Nope. And another thing, a lot of the ways people try to define category mistakes, they kind of sneak in a specific viewpoint. Like saying they're grammatically correct but don't mean anything, you already decided they're grammatically correct and meaningless before you even start. And those are things philosophers are arguing about.
That's a great point. It's like baking your assumptions right into the definition. Not very helpful if you're trying to have a debate.
So if we can't really nail down a perfect definition, how do we even know a category mistake when we see one? Is it just like a gut feeling?
Honestly, there's a lot to be said for that gut feeling. The source calls it the phenomenological aspect, which basically means what it feels like to experience it. And we can sort of train that feeling, right? We know it's off because we've seen those classic examples, the number 2 is blue, that sort of thing. It's recognizing that same kind of off-dashness.
It's like knowing a bad pun when you hear one. Even if you can't write down the perfect definition of humor, some combinations just clunk.
Exactly. And our source points out it's not just limited to a few specific ways of putting words together. You get that clunkiness with all sorts of grammatical structures. You can have adjectives, like 2 is green.
Adverbs.
Yeah, like John thinks furiously.
Prepositional phrases even.
Oh, absolutely. My left nostril is in love with Tuesday. It's everywhere.
See? Told you. It's everywhere. And it's not just simple sentences either, right? That wrongness, that offness, it hangs on even when you get fancier with the grammar.
You're absolutely right. Like take the number 2 is in blue. Still weird, right? Even though it's the opposite of our first example. And even with those either sentences, the logicians call them disjunctions, it still sounds strange. Either their number 2 is blue or it is prime.
The first part still throws you off. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The source mentions that what's considered a category mistake can change depending on the situation. Like, that is green is totally normal if you're pointing at a tree, but super bizarre if you're talking about the number 2.
Yeah, context is key. And it's not just the immediate situation either. It's also about what we assume is true about the world.
Background assumptions, right?
Exactly. Like the priest is pregnant. Sounds weird if you assume priests are always men, but totally normal if you're in a place where women can be priests. This whole context thing, it's a real headache for some of the theories trying to explain what's going on with category mistakes.
Makes sense. So this isn't just some newfangled philosophical fad, is it? The source makes it sound like thinkers have been bumping into this idea for a long, long time.
Oh yeah, big time. Aristotle, way back in the day, was already picking at similar ideas. He used the example of snub nose versus snub bowl. Snub nose makes sense, but snub bowl just feels wrong, even though snub basically means the same as concave, and saying concave bowl is perfectly fine. He was trying to figure out why some descriptions just don't seem to stick to certain kinds of things.
So the seeds were planted way back then.
Yeah.
But who actually gave us the term category mistake? Who made it a thing philosophers talk about?
That honor goes to Gilbert Ryle, mid-20th century. He made category mistakes a big deal, said they were crucial for understanding ontological categories, basically what kinds of things exist and how they relate to each other. He even said, and I quote, "So we are in the dark about the nature of philosophical problems and methods if we are in the dark about types and categories."
Wow, he thought it was that important to doing philosophy.
Absolutely. And he was building on the work of Bertrand Russell, who did a lot of work on paradoxes and types of logic. Russell argued the sentences that seem grammatically fine but lead to paradoxes could be cleared up by figuring out where the confusion about logical types was. Ryle took that idea and ran with it. He thought loads of philosophical problems could be solved by spotting the hidden category mistakes that made them seem puzzling in the first place.
And this all ties into his famous critique of mind-body dualism, right? The idea that the mind is a separate thing from the body.
Exactly. In the concept of mind, he argues that this whole idea of separating mind and body is a big fat category mistake. He saw dualism as lumping the mind into the same category as physical objects, which, he argued, is a no-go. Now, there's some debate about how directly his general work on category mistakes connects to this specific application.
It's not a one-to-one mapping.
Right. But there's no denying that Ryle got a lot of philosophers paying attention to category mistakes.
So once Ryle put it on the map, did everyone just say, okay, category mistakes are meaningless? And that was that.
If only it were that simple. A lot of philosophers in the mid-20th century did jump on the meaningless bandwagon, so much so that Arthur Pryor, a philosopher of language, said anyone who thought category mistakes were actually false was basically a heretic. But there were always folks who weren't buying it.
People pushing back.
You bet. Quine, for example, always ready with a spicy take, called the whole meaninglessness idea a spontaneous revulsion against silly sentences, basically an overreaction.
It sounds about right for Quine. So those early critics were mostly focused on debunking the meaningless label rather than offering up their own explanations.
That's the gist of it. It wasn't until the 1960s that philosophers really started looking at category mistakes as a linguistic phenomenon, something worth studying in its own right. Drange, for instance, wrote a whole book on the subject, and there were lively debates about whether these sentences even have what philosophers call a truth value.
Truth value. So could a sentence like "the number 2 is blue" actually be true or false? Not just, gibberish? That's a pretty wild idea.
It is a bit mind-bending, isn't it? Philosophers like Lambert and Hack, they argued that these sentences were actually false. They called this the falsidal view.
Falsidal. Catchy.
I know, right? But others, like Brady, Goddard, and Routley, they weren't convinced. This is also when philosophers started trying to apply formal logic to analyze category mistakes.
So what about the linguists? Do they have anything to say about all this philosophical head-scratching?
Oh, absolutely. Though they almost never used the term category mistake. They had their own labels: selectional violations, semantic anomaly, sortal presuppositions. Linguists gotta have their jargon, but they were definitely talking about the same kind of thing. And Chomsky, of course, couldn't resist chiming in. In his early work, he used the sentence, "colorless green ideas sleep furiously," as a prime example of a grammatically correct but totally meaningless sentence. He used this to argue that syntax, the rules of grammar, can be completely separate from semantics, the meaning of words.
Funny, because that sentence itself sounds like a category mistake waiting to happen.
I know, right? The irony. So at first, Chomsky was on team meaningless.
But
But later on, he changed his tune. He started saying these sentences weren't just meaningless, they were actually ungrammatical, like syntax itself had rules to block them. This sparked a huge debate in linguistics, the famous linguistics wars between the interpretive and generative camps. They were battling it out over where exactly this ill-formedness was coming from.
sounds like everyone had a piece of the puzzle, but no one could quite put it all together. Where do things stand today?
Well, after all that excitement in the 60s and 70s, talk about category mistakes kind of died down in both philosophy and linguistics by the 80s. The general consensus among linguists seemed to be that these sentences were semantically anomalous or semantically ill-formed, which often meant, yeah, they were grammatically fine, but didn't really mean anything.
Back to meaninglessness.
Pretty much. But get this, since the early 2000s, there's been a bit of a comeback, a mini revival, as the Stanford folks call it.
A category mistake renaissance.
I like the way you think.
Okay, so we've got a bit of historical context. We've got a feel for what these category mistakes are supposed to be. Now let's dig into the meat of it. How do philosophers try to explain why these sentences feel so wrong? Our source lays out a bunch of different approaches: syntactic, semantic, pragmatic, presuppositional. Let's start with the syntactic approach, shall we?
Sounds good. This is where syntax, the structure of sentences, takes center stage. And Chomsky's later work is a big part of this approach.
The one where he changed his mind.
Exactly. The idea here is that category mistakes are actually a problem with the grammar itself. The theory says that words come with these selectional features attached to them, things like whole plus animate or abstract. These features act like little rule books dictating what kinds of words can be combined in a sentence.
So it's like certain verbs just have these built-in requirements for the kind of thing they can act on.
Exactly. Like take the sentence, sincerity admires the boy. Feels off, right? Well, the syntactic approach would say it's because the verb admires needs a subject that's animate, a living thing. But sincerity is tagged with the animate and ab plus abstract features, so they clash.
Okay, I see how that works.
Hmm.
But the Stanford source, they bring up some counterexamples. There's those Hebrew examples about verbs for picking grapes versus picking other fruits, and verbs for putting on socks versus putting on other clothing. It seems like you need an insanely specific set of features to handle all those cases.
Absolutely. Like having features like ab plus grape or past sock, it all feels a bit too convenient. Like you're making up features just to explain away these weird sentences. It undermines the idea that these syntactic rules are independently motivated.
Meaning they're supposed to be needed for other things in language, not just for explaining away category mistakes.
Precisely. And there's another wrinkle. We can stick category mistakes into bigger sentences, and yeah, the whole thing might sound a little off, but it doesn't feel like pure grammatical garbage.
It's not word salad.
Exactly. Like John said that the number 2 is green. Weird, yes, but not like John said that table there is green, which is just pure gibberish.
So if category mistakes were truly just bad grammar, you'd expect them to behave like any other ungrammatical sentence when you embed them.
That's the problem. And don't forget that pesky context sensitivity. Grammar rules don't usually change depending on whether you're talking about an apple or the concept of freedom.
Right. So the purely syntactic approach seems to fall a bit short. What about the semantic approaches? Our friends at Stanford tell us there are 3 main contenders: meaninglessness, contentlessness, and truth valuelessness. Let's tackle those one by one.
Let's do it. Starting with meaninglessness, which we already know was pretty popular back in the day. Right. And it does have a certain intuitive appeal. Sentences like, the number 2 is blue, they just don't seem to make any sense. And the Stanford folks point out, if we say that category mistakes are grammatically okay but inherently meaningless, it gives us a neat way to categorize them. Plus, some theories about meaning, like conceptual role semantics, they might naturally lead to the conclusion that these sentences are meaningless because they don't fit into our web of concepts.
But that whole context sensitivity thing, that's got to be a problem for this view too, right? If that is green is meaningless when you're pointing at a number, but meaningful when you're pointing at a leaf, then meaning would be super flaky, changing all the time depending on what you're talking about.
Exactly. Meaning is usually seen as something stable, something that belongs to the sentence itself, not something that pops in and out of existence depending on what's going on around you. And then there's the embedding problem again. If the number 2 is green is pure gibberish, how can we understand? John said that the number 2 is green. Like, if a piece of a sentence doesn't mean anything, how does the whole sentence suddenly gain meaning? This really messes with the principle of compositionality.
Compositionality being the idea that the meaning of a whole sentence comes from the meanings of its parts.
That's it. So the meaninglessness view would have to explain how a meaningless part can contribute to a meaningful whole. It's like trying to add a bunch of numbers together when one of them is just blank space.
No way to get a total. And there's another issue. Category mistakes pop up all the time in figurative language. Metaphors, that kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. Like the classic, the poem is pregnant with meaning. If poem and pregnant belong to completely separate categories, so separate that putting them together is meaningless, how do we even begin to understand the metaphor?
Right, if it's just nonsense, how do we get any meaning out of it at all? It seems like there has to be some basic literal meaning that we can then play around with. The source mentions Grace's theory of metaphor, where the whole point is that the metaphor is literally false or absurd. That's what makes us look for a deeper, figurative meaning.
Exactly. And although some theories try to sidestep the whole literal meaning thing, they usually still depend on the individual words having established meanings. The source talks about Stern's that operator view, and even that runs into problems with more complex metaphors that involve lots of category clashes.
All right, so meaninglessness has its issues. What about contentlessness? What's the deal with that one?
So contentlessness says that, yeah, category mistakes are meaningful in the sense that the words themselves have their usual meanings and the grammar is correct. But they don't actually express a complete proposition. A proposition is basically the content of a statement, something that can be true or false.
So it's like the sentence has all the right pieces, but they don't fit together in a way that makes a complete thought.
A perfect way to put it. And the source mentions two ways to develop this idea. Radical contextualism, which says the context just doesn't give us enough information to figure out what some words mean in these weird combinations, and the idea that the individual meanings just don't add up to a coherent proposition.
But the source also throws some shade at this view. What about that sentence sequence? This pen is green, so is the number 2. The second sentence seems to be using is green in the same way as the first, where it clearly does express a proposition.
Good catch. The way "so" is refers back to the first sentence. It really suggests that we're talking about the same property in both cases. And the source also mentions this idea of evaluating propositions across different possible worlds. If the thing I'm currently thinking about is green, it makes sense when I'm thinking about a table, then even if in some other world I was thinking about the number 2, it seems like that same proposition would still exist. It's just that the object, the thing being talked about, would now be a number instead of a table.
So it seems like we can form propositions that involve this kind of strange predication, even if it feels a bit off.
Exactly. And contentlessness, just like meaninglessness, has trouble dealing with embedded clauses and figurative language, especially those Grecian accounts of metaphor that depend on having a literal meaning to work with.
Okay, so we've ruled out meaninglessness and contentlessness. That leaves us with,
Truth valuelessness.
say that 5 times fast.
Don't tempt me.
But seriously, what's the story with this one?
All right, so truth valuelessness says that category mistakes are meaningful, they do express propositions, but those propositions don't have a truth value. They're neither true nor false.
So they exist in this weird limbo.
Pretty much. And this view actually manages to sidestep a lot of the problems we've seen with the other two, like this is green when you're talking about a number. We can say it expresses a proposition, that the number 2 is green, but that proposition just doesn't have a truth value. It's neither true nor false in the way we usually think about green.
Okay, I can see how that could work. Does it help with the embedding and figurative language problems too?
It does, because whether those sentences are okay often doesn't depend on whether the embedded clause or the metaphor is literally true or false.
So it's more about the overall meaning, the overall effect.
Right. And the source even brings up this interesting argument from a philosopher named Shaw. He talks about how we interpret quantifiers, those words like all and some, and he says we tend to interpret them in a way that avoids category mistakes. Like we're unconsciously trying to make sure that the things we're quantifying over, that they make sense in relation to the property we're talking about. And Shaw says this suggests that we're treating category mistakes as truth valueless.
Like we're trying to keep things logically neat and tidy.
Exactly. Always striving for maximum truth evaluability. But, of course, there are counter-arguments. The source mentions Mankiewicz, who gives examples where we don't always restrict our interpretations in a way that avoids category mistakes.
So maybe we're not always so obsessed with truth and logic. Maybe there's something else going on.
Could be. And even if we do tend to avoid category mistakes when we're using quantifiers, maybe it's not because we see them as truth valueless. Maybe it's more about trying to be felicitous, saying things that are appropriate and make sense in the context.
So truth valuelessness might not be the whole story.
Exactly. And on top of that, there's a bigger philosophical problem looming over truth valuelessness, Tarski's truth schemas.
Those sound ominous.
They're a big deal in philosophy of language. Basically, there are these fundamental principles about truth, like a proposition is true if and only if what it describes is actually the case and false otherwise. And the source explains how a philosopher named Williamson argues that these principles, they just don't play nice with the idea of propositions that are neither true nor false. It leads to contradictions.
So if you're on team truth valuelessness, you might have to ditch or seriously rework Tarski's truth schemas.
Pretty much. Which is a big deal because those schemas are kind of a cornerstone of how we understand truth. But to be fair, there are already other reasons why some philosophers question those schemas, like the whole liar paradox thing.
This statement is false, the classic self-contradictory statement.
Right. That one's been giving philosophers headaches for centuries.
So basically, whether truth valuelessness works for you depends on your views about bigger philosophical questions.
Exactly. And the source goes even deeper into this rabbit hole, looking at how truth valuelessness deals with category mistakes in complex logical sentences.
Oh boy, here we go.
They talk about different systems of logic, like weak clean, strong clean, and supervaluationism. And each one has its own quirks when it comes to predicting which sentences will sound off to us.
And I'm guessing none of them is perfect.
Nope. Weak clean, for example, says that a lot more sentences are bad than we intuitively think are bad, while strong clean and supervaluationism might miss some sentences that actually do sound weird at us.
So it's a mixed bag all around. None of the semantic approaches can fully explain the strangeness of category mistakes. What about the pragmatic approach? What does that bring to the table?
The pragmatic approach says, hey, maybe category mistakes are actually fine grammatically and they have meaning, and maybe even a truth value.
Wait, really? After all that?
The twist is they say these sentences are just pragmatically inappropriate, like they're not the right thing to say in a given situation. They usually explain this by using Grice's maxims of cooperative conversation.
Remind me what those are again.
So Grace, he said that when we talk to each other, we generally follow these unspoken rules to make sure the conversation flows smoothly. Like be truthful, be informative, be relevant, be clear. The pragmatic approach says that category mistakes often violate these rules.
Okay, I can see that. Like saying something obviously false or obviously true, that can definitely feel weird in a conversation.
Right, it's like you're not really playing by the rules. But the source points out that category mistakes often feel even more wrong than just breaking one of Grace's rules. And what about those category mistakes that aren't obviously true or false? Like the temperature in London is either green or below freezing.
Yeah, that doesn't fit neatly into the too true or too false box.
Exactly. So Grace's maxims might not be enough to capture the full weirdness of category mistakes.
Okay, last but not least, we've got the presuppositional approach. This one sounds like it tries to connect the oddness of category mistakes to something more fundamental about how we use language.
It does. The idea here is that category mistakes trigger these background assumptions, things we take for granted when we're talking to each other. Philosophers call these presuppositions. And when those presuppositions aren't met, the sentence just feels wrong, even if it's not technically false.
Presuppositions, like in that example, the King of France is bald.
That's the one. That sentence presupposes that France has a king. If it doesn't, the whole thing sounds weird, even though it's not exactly a lie.
So maybe a sentence like, the number 2 is green, presupposes that numbers can have colors. And because they can't, in the same way that physical objects can, the presupposition fails and the sentence sounds off.
Exactly. And one of the nice things about this approach is that presuppositions have been studied a lot. Philosophers and linguists know how they behave when you embed them in different kinds of sentences. And the way category mistakes behave in those same contexts lines up pretty well with what we know about presuppositions. So it's a potential explanation for some of the patterns that other approaches struggled with.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal, but I'm guessing there are different ways to flesh out this presuppositional account.
Oh, for sure. Like, does a presupposition failing mean the sentence has no truth value at all? Or does it just mean the sentence is weird but could still be true or false? That ties back to the semantic debates we had earlier.
So the truth valuelessness gremlins are back. And what about the presuppositions themselves? What exactly are they? Are they these super general assumptions about types of things, like assuming the subject of a sentence is an entity or a property, as a philosopher named Asher suggests? Or are they more specific, like assuming the subject has a color or can be prime or composite, like Magidor argues?
Those are the big questions. And Magidor, he has some interesting arguments against those super general presuppositions. He uses examples like polynomials are prime, which mathematicians actually say, and after images have colors, which vision scientists talk about. These examples suggest that experts in certain fields can sometimes bend the rules of categories without it sounding weird.
So maybe those general presupposition rules are a bit too rigid?
Maybe. And then there's the question of how those presuppositions get triggered in the first place. Is it built into the meanings of the words themselves? Is it based on our knowledge of the world? Or is it all about what we're assuming is true in a particular conversation, like Stolnicker says? Stolnicker's view seems to be the best fit for explaining why category mistakes can be so sensitive to context.
So much to think about. It seems like each of these approaches sheds light on something, but none of them can capture the whole picture. It's amazing how trying to figure out what's so weird about the number 2 is blue leads to all these deep questions about language and meaning.
It really is. And as the source points out, our understanding of category mistakes has big implications for other philosophical debates too, like foundational questions in philosophy of language. For example, the meaninglessness view really struggles to explain how sentences can be compositional if some of their parts are meaningless. And remember, Tarski's truth schemas. Well, the truth valuelessness view has some explaining to do there too. And the presuppositional account, it suggests there might be way more things that can trigger presuppositions than we thought, which has a huge impact on our understanding of how presuppositions work.
And what about those specific debates in philosophy of language?
Right. Like metaphor. If category mistakes are meaningless, then how do we understand metaphors that use them? And in the philosophy of fiction, if category mistakes are meaningless or contentless, it's really hard to explain how operator-based theories of fiction work.
Operator-based theories. Refresh my memory.
These are theories that use special logical operators to analyze how we make sense of fictional statements, like Sherlock Holmes lived at 221B Baker Street. We know Sherlock Holmes isn't real, but we can still talk about him in a meaningful way. Operator-based theories try to explain how that works.
Okay, so if category mistakes don't have meaning or content, those theories have a problem on their hands.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of copredication. This is where we can ascribe multiple properties to the same thing, even if those properties seem to belong to different categories, like lunch, which took place on Tuesday, was delicious. We're talking about lunch as both an event and a thing.
And that's totally fine. No red flags there.
Nope. But then you get sentences like, the football game was delicious, or the number 2 is on the shelf, and those are classic category mistakes. So the challenge is, how do you explain why some of these mixed category sentences are okay, while others are total clunkers?
It's like a philosophical sorting hat.
Hmm.
Some combinations get a pass, others get sent to, wherever bad sentences go.
I love that analogy. And the source talks about some responses to this challenge. Some philosophers try to use type-based semantics, where they assign different types to different kinds of things, and then they have rules for how those types can combine. Others focus on the properties themselves, saying that some properties are just more versatile than others.
So deliciousness can apply to both events and things, but being on the shelf only applies to physical objects.
Something like that. And then there's the polysemy approach. Polysemy is where a single word can have multiple related meanings.
Like bank can mean a financial institution or the edge of a river.
Exactly. So maybe some of these seemingly weird combinations are just cases of words being used in different senses.
Interesting. But probably controversial, right?
Oh, absolutely. Polysemy can be a slippery slope, but it's definitely an option.
So even metaphysics, the study of reality itself, gets tangled up with category mistakes.
Big time. Take the debate about material constitution, the classic example being the statue and the lump of clay. Are they one thing or two? Well, if you say the lump is Romanesque is a category mistake, it throws a wrench into those arguments that use Leibniz's law to say that the statue and the lump can't be the same thing.
Leibniz's law being...
The idea that if two things are identical, they have to have all the same properties.
Gotcha. So if you can't even say that the lump is or isn't Romanesque, it messes up the whole argument.
Pretty much. And whether we say category mistakes are truth valueless or just pragmatically odd, it has big implications for this whole debate.
Philosophical dominoes.
I know, right? And then there are those philosophers who say there's only one thing there, just described in different ways. They're called monists. And they have to explain why saying the statue is Romanesque is fine, but saying the lump is Romanesque is a category mistake if they're talking about the same thing.
So many layers to this. We started with a simple question. What's so weird about the number 2 is blue? And now we're down this rabbit hole of language, meaning, and even the nature of reality. Safe to say, category mistakes are a lot more than just silly sentences.
Absolutely. They force us to confront some of the deepest questions about how language works, how we think, and what the world is really like. The fact that there's still so much debate about them shows just how complex these systems are. We haven't found the one right answer yet.
So for everyone listening, you've now had a crash course in category mistakes, the history, the different viewpoints, and the surprising connections to all these other areas of philosophy. Hopefully you've had a few aha moments along the way.
I know I have. And as you go about your